I'm Wendy Capewell, an experienced counsellor and psychotherapist. I work with so many people who feel that they're the only ones struggling with the issues that they share with me. Possibly, like many of you, they feel so alone. And so the aim of this podcast is to talk to guests who have their own stories to share, their experience of the struggles that they've been through, or maybe they're continuing to live with, offering their insights as well as their inspiring journey. So let me introduce my guest. Good morning, everyone. So today I've got James Hawes with me. He's a psychotherapist and author. But I'm going to hand over to James because I'd like him to tell us all much more about himself.
Thanks, Wendy, and thanks for inviting me on your programme today. So, yes, my name is James Hawes. I'm based in Nottingham in the UK, and I work mainly as a counselling psychotherapist. So my normal week really comprises of working in a secondary school. I've been working in a school for many years, probably about 20 years now, as a counselling psychotherapist. I also run a private practice, generally very busy, mainly working with men. So I specialise in working with men. Probably 98% of my clients are male. But I also work with couples, and I also work as a supervisor as well. So that's my bag ultimately.
That's very succinct and says it all, I guess. Yeah. Okay. So would you like to tell us more about the kind of work you do with men?
Yes, well, I mean, in terms of I work individually with men, and I also have worked in groups over the years and continue to do so. So I have set up men's groups or circle of men where we're really trying to help and give men a space to express their feelings in a safe place. I've also set up specifically anger groups called Shout. For men over many years, kind of 10 week, 20-hour programs, really drilling into the area of anger. So, I mean, mentioning anger, that is definitely one of my specialisms and one of the ways that I work with men. So lots of men will come to me specifically, I suppose, about working with rage. So that kind of explosive anger. But apart from that, I mean, men will come. I always say men get to therapy often in a crisis. You know, when things have really gone wrong, or they have been told perhaps by their partner, if you don't get this sorted, then you're out or I'm leaving. So it's kind of often crisis centered. So it could be something about classically anger, or it could be something in terms of relational stuff, lacking emotional fitness, lacking intimacy, lacking ability to communicate. And of course, I work with areas of anxiety and depression. It could be sex and sexuality issues, could be issues around masculinity, just men kind of trying to wonder how they fit in. Do they fit in? What does it mean to be a man? These kind of questions that maybe they are not able to talk to their friends about, so they will bring it into the therapy room.
So why do you, I think it's great. I mean, and I see men too, and I'm seeing more and more men over the period of time since I've been doing my work as well. Why do you think, why do they not talk to their friends about it? What do you think stops them? I mean, women do quite well, a reasonable amount, more and more so, but men find it more difficult.
Sure, and I would probably say that is the way that men are constructed, the kind of man rules, if you like, or the things like I call it the real man discourse. And I think very early on, boys have learned that it's not okay to talk about your feelings, not okay, especially your vulnerable feelings. So I often say, look, many men suffer from the trauma of emotional constraint. So they have learned that actually classically through the kind of rules like big boys don't cry, you got to be strong, you got to be tough. So basically, that's they're learning, and they learn, I think, very early on, from the age of probably about 5 to 7, that it's okay to feel pain, but you must not express it. If you express your pain, physical or emotional pain, but especially emotional, then you're likely to get shamed through things like crybaby, girl, wuss, sissy, all those kind of things that many boys have learned. So they kind of learn that, okay, it's not safe to share my vulnerable feelings. I have to hold on to these by myself, and that leads to ultimately self-reliance. And I think self-reliance, wonderful as it is in many ways, becomes a bit of a curse, especially in relationships, because it ends up men being quite emotionally mute and distant and emotionally isolated. And so if they're living in a kind of with a partner or with a friend or with friends, there's a kind of code of, actually, we just don't talk, we don't do this. It's not safe. When men have the courage, of course, to do it, which many do, then it's almost like, and I've seen this in men's groups and stuff like that, one man may have the courage to express his vulnerability, and then you can see all the other men around the room nodding. Yeah, that, you're talking about me, almost. And it's amazing. Almost like when that dam collapses, that we're all having the same issues, the same feelings, but no one has dared to talk about them.
No, and I recognise that too as well. I think men will open up to me more readily. I've had couples where the wife or female partner has contacted me. He doesn't talk. He won't talk, and yet they come into as a couple, or even on their own, and they start talking to me. And I guess it is feeling safe enough to express how they're feeling.
Yes, and I think it's really important. It's interesting about therapy, and equally in my own relationship as a female in a heterosexual relationship, that I think it's men want to know that yes, it's safe, but the other really wants to hear, and so it's about giving time. It's not like, it doesn't come so quickly as maybe it does for women. It's like, my wife can talk to me, come in the door, she'll talk to me for hours, just, talk. Now, I can't do that. I need to know that almost like, you really want to listen to me, don't you? You really do. This is really, it's almost like, for me, I've got to really know, and it sounds a bit maybe, or selfish, or like, yeah, right, if I'm going to talk, I need to know I've got your full attention. My wife will carry on talking when I've moved out of the room and keep on talking, so it's almost like there's more this useness to talk, but equally, maybe on the other side of that, women often have experienced, well, no, but they're not listening anyway. But yeah, so I think, coming back to that point about the idea that when we give men permission and when we're really there for them, I think absolutely they're capable of talking about the whole range of feelings and emotions.
Yeah, I would agree. There is something about, I think two things came into my mind then. There's listening to respond and listening to understand. And too often we're all guilty of listening to respond.
Yeah.
We're waiting to give that out. Oh, I know that. And yeah. And the other one is respect. I think that is often, a man, in my view, really needs that sense of respect, to feel that they are respected.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it, respect? Because you're right, but I wonder whether that idea of respect around men is that, almost like I don't know, comes from an old kind of patriarchal rule that I'm a man and I deserve to be respected. I mean, we all deserve to be respected.
Yeah.
But I think in particularly men think, I need to know that I am respected. And I think sometimes that leads to this idea of getting going up, the success kind of paradigm, that actually I really need to know that people respect me, and what that I'm we all deserve respect. We all want to be respected. I want to treat everybody with respect. I expect people to treat me with respect as a human, whatever level or within the hierarchy I am. But I don't know, there's something else there for men, and I'm not so sure I'm always comfortable with that idea. It's a bit like when men use the word of emasculation. You're emasculating me, or women are emasculating me. You're taking my power away. And I'm thinking, is that really, can it happen? I kind of talk to one of my sons about this quite a lot, and it's like, is it really possible? And it's almost like something is being done to me. And yet, we're still in a society where men tend to hold most of the powerful parts of society.
It's very mixed, I think, society. The way it's progressed, I think, in my mind, since the last World War, especially because men went away, they were the heroes, they were fighting, they came back. I'm talking the UK specifically now, but women had taken their jobs. So I can remember distinctly that my mother saying about my father, he went away a man, he came back a mouse.
Right.
Because he was a broken man, he got PTSD, and it was recognized in those times. But he was, and he couldn't talk about it.
Yeah.
But women had taken the job, so therefore, where was their place anymore? And I think that has, to a degree, still carried on in a way. I'm all for equality, but there is something about women could do it all now. So where do men get where do they get that feeling?
Well, I mean, it sounds like we could be getting into a really interesting debate here, Wendy, because I think it's an interesting thing, even the language you've used there of women took the men's jobs. Well, in that war, women had to do the jobs.
Yeah.
So they went into the jobs, and they were, you could say, empowered, and in that point, society really changed in terms of look, women, these jobs, it's not just men can do these jobs. So there was a real growth point there, and of course, in after the war, there was a lot of interesting stuff. Like, even if it wasn't about the professional football, women became professional footballers, and then when the men came back, well, actually that all had to stop, and it's only now in the last maybe decade that we're seeing women playing football again at a professional level. And it's fascinating in terms of power and empowerment.
Yeah.
But I think what we've seen in the last 60 to 70 years, I'm reading books and or looking at stuff and thinking, hold on, women and many men actually only got the vote about 100 years ago, and that was only the aristocrats or the higher class men who had. So not even most men didn't even have the vote. So we're talking 100 years, but only in the last 60 years has society changed incredibly in terms of the power of women. And what they've been able to do in society, and that push towards equality. And I think ultimately that men are still trying to catch up with that.
Yeah.
And what happens is that there ends up being a backlash, as in, a kind of an attack on, some women are taking our jobs, or
I think it was that view at that time.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Definitely.
Absolutely, I understand that.
Yeah.
And like you say, when men came back from war, of course, many of them were broken. They lost a lot of confidence, and what do they do with that trauma? Many of them didn't speak about it. It wasn't very people were speaking about it. They kept it to themselves. They kept it to themselves because that's what they learned to do as boys. You don't talk about this stuff. And of course, they were absolutely traumatized.
Yeah.
Frightening stuff.
Yeah.
So we, again, society didn't really help men who had been broken to deal with that. So yeah, there's huge amounts of things there in terms of the rise and the power of women and the diminishment of men in terms of their wound, their emotional woundedness brought on by this awful war.
Yeah. And of course, that goes down generations, because if you've got a father who had sons, a father who had fought in the war, grandfather who fought in the war, or even previous war, whatever, and they're all having to, went through horrendous situations we can't even begin to imagine, and women did too. But that's gone down, so they couldn't talk, and then they were holding on to their pain and suffering, and then they passed that on to their sons and daughters.
Yeah.
So you've got to be tough. You've got to hold back. You can't talk.
Yeah.
So where do you think change? I think there's, we could talk for ages, I think, about that. But moving on, where do you see a lot of this rage and anger in men? What do you see is beneath it?
Well, I mean, firstly, let me say, in terms of anger, I think I'm always, I suppose I'm fed up with the way that many people many therapists actually perceive anger as a bad emotion, a negative emotion. For me,
it's such a good emotion.
All emotions are absolutely fine. What we end up seeing in any emotion, let's say even happiness, that's meant they can be expressed unhealthily. So I'm an advocate for healthy anger. So it's really an important emotion, but most of us, in terms of protection, in restoration, in directness, lots of benefits, and we need it. And we need to train ourselves in that. But however, if we go back, my view about men is that anger's often become the default emotion for men. So if we say that they've been emotionally restricted from the vulnerable emotions, they're not allowed to express anxiety, shame, sadness, hurt, disappointment, things like that. All they've got in their bag is anger. And so the anger channel, they're either it's squeezing out some emotion, or it's seeping out, or it's exploding out. And so we're talking here generally about the unhealthy expression of anger. So if it's their default, then they're not kind of emotionally fit. They've not got the ability to kind of express these vulnerable emotions. So unfortunately, I think it all comes out through anger. And I mean, to the degree, I mean, I could talk more about my kind of understandings of anger. Maybe we don't have time today, but in terms of the different styles or modes of anger, I mean, I break it down into kind of 4 styles really, and that they would be, just very quickly, aggressive anger. So the people who always appear to be aggressive, always angry, always defensive. The other opposite to that would be passive, as I'd say. So that's we internalize anger, attack ourselves, it's my fault. So aggressive anger would be, it's your fault, you're the problem. Passive anger would be, it's my fault, I'm the problem. So self-attack, self-harm in that way. Then we've got passive aggressive anger, which often happens, of course, in many relationships, where it's more subtle, it's hidden. We're not expressing our anger, but we want the other person to feel our anger, so it's indirect. And the other one, the last one, is rage. So that's the explosive anger going from 0 to 100, red mist descending, all that kind of stuff. And for me, rage has everything to do with the past and very little to do with the present. So it's triggered by something very small. It's almost like people are in a trance. So the why, and I generally get men come to me with rage. It's frightening. Generally rages are more passive anger. There's a link there, and of course there's a link to unhealthy shame. So that's the kind of, it's almost like they define it as it's an alien. It's not me. That's not what nobody, talk to all my friends, that they don't see me angry. So they have no idea about this rage. And that's why I think it's got more to do with the past. And we've just been talking a little bit about the past, we could be talking about generations. We could be talking just decades. Often, I think it resides in our childhood, in the little boy stuff. So we're going. It's ultimately, and I say this to men, it's a tantrum, isn't it? And that's deal with. So a lot of the work there would be working with the inner boy.
And the inability at that age to be able to express their frustration, distress, upset, hurt, any other emotion. It's the only avenue that toddlers have.
Yeah, it's power, isn't it? You generally children. I always say, if I work with families, look, children have no power. They can, from one day to the next, they can learn, oh, mum and dad are splitting up, I'm now living in two homes. There is so children don't have power about what goes on around them. And they can perceive parents sometimes as ganging up on them, being bullying them in terms of why don't talk back, all this kind of stuff. So there's this sense of, where do I get my voice? How can I express myself? And if we have to stuff, it's generally going to go eruption, volcanic, because we can only stuff for so long.
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's so much in there, James. I mean, but I think the one thing that anybody, and I'm going to get this book that you've written, The Secret Lives of Men, because I think this is just going to be so good for both men and women, because there's a lot to learn about men, and how as women we help them and support them, and how they react in relationships. So yeah, there's a lot, but and so before we finish, one tip that listeners could take away with themselves.
Well, one tip. I mean, so for me, I do a lot of work on emotional fitness. So what emotional fitness means is to be able to feel and express the right feeling in the right way, and express it towards the right person.
Yeah.
So are we okay?
Yeah.
So for me, if we can learn to check in with ourselves emotionally, and for me, that's emotional fitness is always a discipline. So it's a habit, creating good habits. So I talk about, building emotional muscle, exercising your emotions. They need to be exercised. They need to be moved. So if we can create a habit of checking in with ourselves, so like, let's just say every 1 hour, I can have I can have numerous possibilities of feeling feelings. I might have a memory pop into my head. I might have a text from my partner. I might have a conversation with a colleague. I might have an email from my boss. So this all will emote emotions. Now, if I can just say, okay, I'm going to take just a minute. I'm going to check in with myself and just say, okay, what feelings were kind of moved in me? So because I say the only thing a feeling wants is to be felt. And once it's felt, it can disperse. Now, if it doesn't disperse, they're sticky and they'll stick to inside. So we've got to keep exercising and moving them. So the tip is, check in with yourselves regularly in terms of how you are feeling.
Yeah, I think that is too often people just brush it aside, distract themselves, and don't, as you say, don't give it that attention and really notice what's going on. So great tip. James, I'm going to put all the details in the show notes, but what's one easy way that people can get in touch with you?
The easiest way is through my website, which is called synergycounselling.com.
Okay, thank you so much for today. It's been fascinating. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Wendy.
I hope you found this episode interesting as well as helpful. Do get in touch if you would like to learn more about working with me. My email address is info@wendycapewell.co.uk. Take good care of yourself. Until next time.